I followed the SpaceX story for years before any of us could actually buy a share. The reusable rockets, the satellites, the idea that one company was quietly building the infrastructure for the next 50 years of space travel. So when the IPO finally happened, I sat down and went through the numbers myself. And honestly, what I found changed my mind. Not about SpaceX, the rocket company, about SpaceX, the stock. Here's what most people think they're buying when they buy the ticker SPCX. They think they're buying Falcon 9. They think they're buying Starship. They think they're buying Starlink, the satellite internet business that's actually bringing in real money. That's the story you'll see everywhere. It's not the whole story, and I think that matters more than almost anyone is saying out loud. Back in February, months before any of us could buy a single share, Elon Musk quietly merged SpaceX with xAI, his artificial intelligence company, the one behind Grok. At the time, that combined entity was valued at around $1.25 trillion. So when the IPO finally priced at $135 a share in June and popped 19% on day one to close near 161, you weren't just buying rockets. You were buying a fast-growing, fast-spending AI company bundled inside a rocket company. And almost nobody is talking about that part. I think you should be. Let me show you the number that actually stopped me. In the first quarter of 2026 alone, SpaceX spent just over $10 billion in capital expenditure. That's the money it pours into building its future. Of that $10 billion, $7.7 billion went to xAI. $1.3 billion went to Starlink, the actual satellite business everyone's excited about. And only about $1 billion went to space. To rockets, to launches, to the literal core of what SpaceX is supposed to be. Read that again if you need to. For every dollar SpaceX spent building its future this quarter, more than 3/4 of it went into an AI company, not a space company. And here's why that should give you pause. xAI is reportedly burning somewhere around $12 billion a year, against roughly $500 million in actual annual revenue. That's a burn ratio of close to 24 to 1. I want to be clear, that's not a SpaceX problem on its own. Every major AI lab right now is spending at a similar pace. But it does mean the company you're buying isn't just a profitable space business anymore. It's a profitable space business subsidizing an extremely expensive AI bet. Now let's talk about what's actually making money, because this is where the valuation math gets uncomfortable. The core SpaceX business, Starlink, launches, government contracts, is on pace to bring in somewhere around $23 to $24 billion this year. Strip xAI out of the picture completely, and SpaceX alone trades at somewhere around 65 times its sales. Leave xAI in, blend the numbers together, and depending on how you calculate it, you're closer to 80 or 90 times sales. Let me put that in perspective, because a number like 65 times sales doesn't mean much on its own. It means if SpaceX's revenue never grew another dollar, it would take 65 years of total sales just to equal what investors paid for the company today. Apple, one of the most valuable companies on the planet, trades at roughly 8 times sales. NVIDIA, the company sitting at the center of the entire AI boom, with genuinely explosive growth, trades at roughly 30 times sales. SpaceX priced its IPO at double NVIDIA's multiple for a company that, by its own filing, is still losing money. Here's the part that genuinely surprised me when I went through the filing. Despite the rockets, the satellites, the headlines, SpaceX posted close to $5 billion in net losses last year. Not in some early, scrappy startup phase. Right before its IPO, at a near $2 trillion valuation. One analyst at Morningstar who went through the same numbers put fair value at around $780 billion. That's roughly 55% below where the stock actually priced. That's not a small gap between opinion and reality. That's a massive one. And it's coming from someone whose entire job is valuing companies like this for a living. I also want to flag something that looked impressive at first glance and turned out to be less solid than it sounds. SpaceX signed a major data center deal with an AI company worth over $1 billion a month, running for years. Sounds incredible on paper. Then you read the fine print, and either side can walk away from it with 90 days' notice. That's not the same thing as locked-in recurring revenue. That's a large purchase order that can disappear with a single phone call. I think that distinction matters a lot more than the headline number does. Now, to be fair to the other side of this, because I don't want to pretend the bull case doesn't exist, Starlink really is growing. It's the first satellite internet business to operate at real scale. It has government contracts that competitors can't easily replicate. And it's genuinely profitable on its own. If you strip away the AI story entirely and just look at the space business, there's a real defensible case that this becomes one of the most important infrastructure companies of the next decade. I'm not dismissing that. I just don't think that case, on its own, supports a $2 trillion price tag today. There's also real competition that doesn't get talked about enough. Amazon has its own satellite internet project working to catch up at scale. Other players are entering the space too. SpaceX has a head start, and a big one. But a head start isn't the same as a permanent monopoly. And the valuation right now is priced like there's no real competitor in sight. And then there's a risk that's harder to put a number on, but I think about it every time I look at this stock. Elon Musk is now the public face and decision maker behind Tesla, xAI, Neuralink, and SpaceX all at once. Every one of those companies needs his attention, his capital allocation decisions, and his credibility with regulators and investors. When one person is the key variable behind 5 different companies, that's not a strength you can put on a balance sheet. That's a concentration of risk. And it's one of the quiet reasons some institutional investors stayed cautious, even while retail demand was overwhelming. Which brings me to the obvious counter-argument, because I'd be lying if I said it wasn't real. The IPO was oversubscribed 4 times over. Institutional money wanted in badly. And the people who bought on day one made real money by the closing bell. I'm not disputing that. But oversubscription tells you about demand on launch day. It tells you nothing about whether that price holds up 2 or 3 years from now. History is full of IPOs that popped hard on day one and then quietly underperformed the market for years once the lockup period ended and early insiders started selling. Hype and value look identical on launch day. They almost never stay that way. That lockup period matters more than most new investors realize. It's usually somewhere between 90 and 180 days after an IPO, and it's the moment early employees and early investors are finally legally allowed to sell their shares. We've seen this story before with other massive, hyped IPOs. The stock pops hard on day one, drifts sideways for a few months while everyone's still excited, and then takes a real hit once the lockup expires and a wave of insider selling hits the market all at once. I'd genuinely be surprised if SpaceX is the one exception to that pattern. So let me be honest about where I actually land on this, because I don't think the answer is simply bullish or bearish. SpaceX is not a bad company. Starlink alone could be worth real money on its own in a few years. Starship, if it actually works the way it's designed to, could change an entire industry. And I'm not betting against Elon Musk's ability to solve hard engineering problems, because he's done it before, more than once. My issue isn't with the rockets. My issue is with the price you're being asked to pay today, and the fact that a huge and growing share of that price is now riding on an AI company that's spending money faster than almost anyone else on the planet, inside a deal structure most buyers never even read. If I were thinking about this for myself, here's honestly what I'd do. I would not buy into day one euphoria. Statistically, that's often the most expensive moment to enter any IPO, and SPCX had about as much euphoria as a stock can have. I would mark the lockup expiration date on my calendar, because that's usually when you find out what the real non-hype price actually looks like. And I would mentally separate the two businesses, bundled into one ticker. The rocket and satellite company I genuinely admire, and the AI bet wrapped inside it that I'm far less convinced about at this price. Those are two different investments wearing the same three letters on the NASDAQ. That's my honest read of the numbers, not a recommendation, just where I personally landed after going through the filing myself. Next week, I'm looking at what usually happens to massive record-breaking IPOs exactly 6 months after the hype dies down, and whether history says this one follows the same pattern. Subscribe so you don't miss it.